My name is Lance Ralston. I'm the pastor of an evangelical, non-denominational church in Southern California on the coast, just about an hour north of Los Angeles. We started the church 41 years ago and have taught now through the Bible verse by verse 4 times and closing in on completing the 5th time through the Bible in that 41 years. Started the church back in 1982 with someone you may have heard of, David Guzik, who now leads a ministry called EnduringWord.com. It's a online Bible commentary, free online Bible commentary of every verse of the Bible. I'll talk more about that in future episodes. I have a YouTube channel called Into His Image, where I have a couple of series, one a church history series called Communio Sanctorum, History of the Christian Church, and a verse-by-verse teaching study through the Bible. Right now we have just completed chapter 36 of Genesis and intend to continue that. Those are highly scripted series. What I'm doing here is impromptu. There's no script. It's going to come off very differently because while there'll be some minor editing, there's going to be some doing right now, just sort of talking, and I'm not going to edit that out because I intend this to be more conversational. In this first session, I wanted to talk about the reality that ideas have consequences. Ideas that we hold for a long period of time, really invest in, end up forming our opinions, and then those shape our actions. And those ideas have consequences. If they're good ideas, they have good consequences. If they're bad ideas based on faulty assumptions and bad information, they typically have bad consequences. Good consequences tend to get repeated because they're good and they're rewarding and they have positive results. Bad consequences that bear bad results and bad consequences typically are changed because they result in loss, despair, sorrow, grief. And yet, it seems that many people who have bad ideas that bear bad consequences continue to repeat them. They continue to hold on to the bad ideas that have bad consequences. And that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. When an idea doesn't work, it should be jettisoned. And one should go in search of an alternative idea that actually works. And so what I want to do in just this first episode of Musings of a SoCal Pastor is challenge people to consider, and listen, I recognize that most people watching this are going to be believers. So this is for those of you that share my worldview, which is a biblical worldview, to think about when you're in conversation with those that have a secular worldview. So let me back up and talk about worldviews. Worldviews are kind of our core ideology, the way we view reality. What is the fundamental question of what is real? That forms our worldview. And for those that have a Judeo-Christian or biblical worldview, our core reality is God. He's the creator of all things. We exist because of him, and we exist for him. That worldview really did shape Western civilization, in particular American culture and society, from its founding all the way up to the mid-20th century. Now, listen, people are going to argue about that. They're going to say that's simply not true, but that's an established historical fact. Not everyone was a Christian. Not everyone had a thoroughgoing and consistent biblical worldview, Judeo-Christian worldview. But the basic tenets of the Judeo-Christian worldview held for society. It was the most influential force shaping how society functioned, its view of reality, its sense of right and wrong and morality, ethics. But something happened in the mid-20th century. Secularism, which is the child of the Enlightenment, which turned away from biblical theism, from from the belief in God. Secularism began to vie with the Judeo-Christian worldview for a place of influence in the culture. The main place that took place was in higher education. And it wasn't really seen by much of the American society. And so you had academics who were secularists who began to co-opt and to take over the teaching of professionals and teachers, those that would end up going on to fill educational institutions, so that what began to be communicated and taught to youth and emerging adults was a thoroughgoing secularism. And so the culture continued on with a basic Judeo-Christian worldview, but now you have this influence of a secular worldview that begins to vie with it for control and influence of the culture. And it was right about the 50s, right after World War II, that secularism achieved a parity with the Judeo-Christian worldview in terms of its function as a main influence over American culture and society. Coming into the 60s, we see the result of that with the social revolutions that took place, and now where those institutions of higher education became bastions of a secular worldview. Before they had been kind of hidden, but now they were celebrating their secularism. And we see the social foment that came out of the social revolutions of the 60s. That moved then into the 70s, the late 70s, as those that came out of college began to move into taking over entertainment and media and government. And then now we come into the 80s and the well-known culture wars that took place during the 80s, where now you have, it's out, everybody's seeing it, where you have this clash of worldviews between the Judeo-Christian worldview and the secular worldview. Moving into the 90s, we see the secular worldview gaining increasing prominence and a sense that it is now moving into the driver's seat on the culture. And now we have arrived at a place in 2023, when I record this, where secularism has won. It's effectively won the place of dominant influence on our culture, so that the Judeo-Christian worldview has been marginalized and is being increasingly pushed to the edges, so that those that hold it now are vilified and made to look as those who are standing in the way of progress. And so here's my challenge. As secularism is triumphant and is now dominating the production of civic policy, my challenge is this: look at the result of secularism when it is enshrined in public policy. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, just move right up the West Coast, New York, Philadelphia. I don't need to bring in specific statistics or news stories here. Anyone who pays attention to the news over the last year, over the last week, and what happened in Philadelphia, you know what's happening in these cities where city councils are dominated by secularists. I'm not speaking pejoratively. I'm not saying that as a curse word. I'm saying that is an ideology, that is a worldview that they hold, and they are making decisions based on their ideology, on their worldview, secularism. And so we see homelessness, we see criminality, we see drug addiction. We are seeing the meltdown of the infrastructure of these cities, an increase in murder rates, a lowering of lifespan in these environments where secularism has moved into the driver's seat and is now driving the vehicle of progress. They are not moving towards utopia, they are moving towards a cliff. And we're already seeing the results of their policies lived out in these urban centers around the United States where secularism reigns. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If secularism continues to steer the course of the American system, American society, what we see in downtown Los Angeles and San Francisco, and Portland and Seattle, and Philadelphia and New York will become the scene on the streets of Middle America. Bad ideas have bad consequences. Good ideas have good consequences. And so look back to American history. When America became the dominant nation on earth, because it produced the highest standard of living for the most people for the longest period of time in all of history, because it was fueled by a Judeo-Christian worldview. Was it perfect? No. Was it on its way to the correction of those things that were imperfect? Yes. But that progress towards good was hijacked by secularism and now has become not a progression, but a regression to another dark age.